For a brand that constantly brags about its highest standards, Lange has terrible quality control and servicing. Yet, for various reasons, a lot of these horror stories are never publicized. Today, I'll be telling you about how Lange removed the Moonphase from my friend's Grand Lange 1 Lumen and forgot to put it back in. I'll also be sharing some bad experiences that other collectors have had and discuss what this means for the brand. Before we start, please consider supporting the channel by subscribing. Thank you and enjoy the video. Early last year, a good friend bought this Grand Lange 1 Moonphase Lumen from auction. When the watch arrived, it had a strange fault. The seconds hand would tick and the rest of the watch moved properly when adjusted via crown and pushers. However, the seconds was disconnected from everything else, meaning that the time would never change. This issue was weird because firstly, the watch was unpolished and in good condition, so it was unlikely to have sustained heavy impact. Secondly, when we later sent it into service, there was no evidence that the watch had been opened and tampered with. For reference, Lange can tell if an unauthorized party opens the watch because of the specialized tools they use, and the brand will not hesitate to impose a hefty additional charge if this happens. Regardless, I'll give Lange the benefit of doubt, since the watch was ultimately obtained secondhand. After discovering the strange issue, I helped my friend send the watch into servicing, since he had no boutique relationship. This was the start of a very stressful experience. To begin with, there was apparently some weird miscommunication or logistical issues, which resulted in the watch being held in Singapore for a few weeks for absolutely no reason. While this would usually not be a big issue, the problem was that the auction house needed the servicing quotation for reimbursement purposes. The delay resulted in just the servicing quote alone taking over 2 months. For reference, I've had multiple watches serviced and repaired from Patek, AP, and VC. These brands are able to provide a service quotation on the spot and will return the watch in anywhere from 1 to 3 months. In the case of this Lumen, it was gone for over half a year. Somehow, things only got worse from here. When the watch arrived for collection, I picked it up only to find that the huge luminous Moonphase was missing. Not only can you see a slot that probably holds the Moonphase in place, but the perlage underneath is visible too. Perhaps Lange wanted us to have better appreciation of its finishing, but it is seriously mind-blowing how this watch can pass so many people, none of whom flagged the issue. From the watchmaker that worked on it, whoever helped with QC, and even the boutique staff that happily handed me the watch, I just don't understand how a Moonphase can disappear. And let's not forget that this is a Lumen, one of Lange's most desirable limited edition watches. Ultimately, I called Charles, who is the regional managing director for the brand, telling him I'd leave the watch there and asking them to fix it. There were some rather amusing phone calls, but the Lumen ended up making its second trip back to Germany. While Lange initially said the Lumen would return in a week or two, the watch was held longer. Apparently, they did a more thorough disassembly and discovered another issue with the date pusher that they wanted to rectify, resulting in more time taken. How this was missed during the first round of servicing is beyond me, but whatever. For my friend, the situation sucked, since he spent well into 6 figures for a watch that immediately disappeared for over half a year. Sure, Lange decided to reimburse the auction house for the servicing fee, but the terrible servicing already destroyed his confidence in the brand, resulting in him selling all of his Langes. What's sad to me is that this is not an isolated case, and many other collectors have fallen victim to the brand's poor servicing. Do note that some of the following stories have omitted details so Lange doesn't go and blacklist these customers. To start with, one collector with a special Lange 1 shared that his watch came back from service with a broken jewel and oil on the main plate. The watch was sent back and returned 6 months later with new scratches on the case and movement, but Lange refused to take further action, stating that this was in line with their standards. Another collector bought a Lange one from the boutique, but noticed that the case had a small gap when he inspected the watch closely after getting home. Since the watch was under warranty, he sent it back to Lange hoping to get it fixed, as this sort of gap will likely compromise the water resistance of the watch. However, Lange stated that this gap was somehow within tolerance and returned the watch unrepaired. Beyond choosing not to service watches with clear problems because they somehow fit within the brand's highest standards, Lange also has a worrying tendency to place blame on customers should anything go wrong. Another collector who purchased a Lange one from boutique had an issue where the date marker could count up to 39 days in a month. The boutique staff then claimed that he must have dropped the watch, despite it being absolutely mint. But thankfully, the story ends well, since Lange deemed it a production issue and fixed the watch, albeit over a 5-month period. There are also two similar Lange horror stories that have been publicized online. One comes from 1111 Prince on Instagram. Essentially, while winding his recently serviced datograph that was still under warranty, the crown came off. Lange accused him of dropping the watch due to blemishes on the crown, even though he hadn't dropped or banged it. Multiple watchmakers have weighed in, saying that the blemishes have been polished over, and thus must have been there during the previous service. However, Lange continued to blame the collector and refused to service under warranty, instead charging him almost £3,000. Another story you might have seen comes from YouTube channel Watch Enthusiast London. You can check out the entire video on his channel, but my understanding is that he bought a Zeitwerk that stopped working. He then sent the watch into the London Lange boutique, where a watchmaker opened the watch, caused further damage, and did not take responsibility. As a result, when the watch went back to Germany, Lange did not want to repair the watch under warranty. Instead, they charged him more than £3,500 due to unauthorized opening of the watch. Unlike the previous case, he thankfully had photo evidence from the day before he sent the watch in, which proved that the blame did not lie with him. As a result, the watch was eventually repaired under warranty, although only after a stressful experience. Aside from refusing to take responsibility and pinning blame on collectors, what I find more concerning is that Lange seems to have an inherent inability to fix watches. A collector who purchased a certain limited edition perpetual calendar found that the accuracy of the watch was very far off. Lange was unable to diagnose the issue even after spending months, and decided to make an entirely new piece instead. Similarly, a collector with a datograph had multiple issues with the watch, ranging from movement imperfections visible to the naked eye to the chronograph malfunctioning entirely. The problem did not go away even after multiple services and replacement watches. Speaking of datagraphs, one of my most shocking experiences was when I was trying on a rose gold datograph in the Singapore boutique, and the watch suddenly stopped moving despite being fully wound. Me and the boutique staff tried various things, but the watch would just not move. The staff then claimed they'd send it back to the watchmaker to get checked. Lo and behold, the next day I came back to the boutique since I happened to be in the area and the same watch was on display. Apparently, the watch started randomly moving again, so the boutique decided there was no issue. There clearly was no attempt to fix it since it would likely need to return to Germany, and yet it was on display and ready for purchase just a day later. I'm not sure if it's a datograph thing, but QC seems to be exceptionally poor, with another collector from Singapore reporting visible specks of dust on the dial side. Ultimately, you're free to make of these stories what you will. There are so many more horror stories that I've heard from Singapore Lange collectors that I haven't mentioned out of privacy. But from what I've seen, Lange is a perfect storm of poor QC, long and terrible servicing, and a refusal to take responsibility for issues. I've met many senior Lange staff, including Wilhelm himself, and what I find most concerning is that none of them seem to acknowledge that this is a problem that needs to be fixed. I distinctly remember my first Lange event with other collectors, which was the 2021 novelty launch. An older gentleman next to me kept complaining that two of his watches had oil leaks on the dial and other problems after returning from servicing, but the Lange staff kept insisting that it was fine. Clearly, collectors have been complaining about these problems privately for a while, but nothing has changed. I still think the brand makes some amazing watches, some of which trade at a huge discount to retail on the grey market. However, I just don't have the confidence to own another watch from them. I've heard of issues from almost all models, with even the supposedly robust Odysseus suffering from stuck date discs. Yet, as a collector that has experienced problems with various brands, ranging from detachable crowns to malfunctioning rotors, I will give Lange the benefit of doubt. In the world of high horology, no brand is perfect. But in my opinion, you must have fast and quality servicing, or collectors are not going to have confidence in your brand. The problem with Lange is the need for most watches to travel all the way back and forth from Germany to be fixed. And clearly, they often come back with more problems than they left with. I feel the brand needs to invest more into having capable regional service centers and better QC. I know Richemont Group as a whole lacks watchmakers, but the rapidly increasing Lange RRPs suggests that they should have the funds to invest into regaining the trust of their collectors. Without even getting started on the controversial topic of bundling, all I'll say is that I hope the brand does better. The watches are nice, and the Singapore team has some great people, but Lange is failing them as a brand. To the collectors, I have two pieces of advice. First off, if you're buying a watch, please check it carefully. Check the complication and big date thoroughly, as well as if there are any visual imperfections on both the dial and movement side. I've handled some relatively new Langes with rusted screws as an example. This applies even if you're buying a watch from the boutique. I've never shared this before, but my rose gold Lange 1 Moonphase actually had a very small imperfection on the dial. Although I really looked at the watch carefully before paying, it was a small smudge that was only visible under direct lighting or at very specific angles. While I can't find a photo of it, here's a similar story where a collector bought a brand new Lange that had issues with the AR coating and more. Ultimately, take your time and check the watch before you pay for it, since if there are any issues, it will be gone for a while. Secondly, you may want to take photos of the watch at key events, such as before you send it off for servicing and after you get it back. While I do think and hope it's unlikely, you never know whether Lange might want to blame you for an issue that was not your fault. If you enjoyed this video, check out my other watch reviews and video podcast series. Thank you for watching.